Hello and welcome to our next edition of Plan Talk. I'm sorry I can't work out how to switch the volume off on my computer, so you'll hear funny noises. But so just very quickly before I introduce today's speaker, just kind of so everyone's got the same understanding of the purpose of these events. We started them just during the lockdown period as a way of the planning industry to exchange ideas, learn about new things, and kind of try to build a bit of momentum. It's your space, so if you've got ideas as to what subject areas we should cover, please let us know. The best person to contact is Natalie Wells, or you can let me know. My name is Peter Kemp, obviously. And there we go. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Euan Mills, formerly of CPC and formerly of GLA fame. But of course, today is his first day in a new job. So congratulations on your new job, Euan. We're really looking forward to where you go next. So Euan's going to come and talk to us about digital planning, really, the future of the planning system that he's been working so hard on all his career. So yeah, I'm going to switch my webcam off and microphone and go for it, Euan.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for watching in. So I wanted to talk I've titled my talk "Learning to Plan from a Pandemic" because I think when we talk about digital, this is more than just about kind of your traditional digital transformation. I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the last couple of months, and a lot of things that we can actually change. Now we've seen. Lots of talks, particularly in planning circles, around virtual committee meetings, flexibility, public consultations, and kind of a lot of the issues that we've been discussing are very much focused on kind of the process of planning. And I don't know if anyone's been lucky enough to actually watch one of these committee meetings where a cat invaded the committee meeting. This is Camden's committee meeting. So there's a lot of entertainment coming from that as well. But the pandemic that we're going through, I think there is a silver lining in that it can trigger a lot more than just tweaks to where we work, to how we meet, to working remotely. And I think a quick look at some of the headlines that really shine a light on the impact that planning has had over the last couple of decades, and issues around spatial justice are really coming to the forefront. Everything from housing quality to air quality, balconies, parks, public transport. The pandemic has highlighted the places where planning has actually failed, and I think if anything, one thing that we can learn, one thing that we can take from the last couple of months is that we really have to start getting better at kind of doing our jobs despite of the circumstances. And the pandemic has inadvertently given us the opportunity to change not only where we work, right? So whether it's virtual committee meetings, virtual pre-apps, but I think we have to think about how we can actually transform how we do the work that we do. And digital transformation, kind of quite often we tend to think of it as kind of using digital tools, but this definition I think is a lot more robust, and it's about thinking about how we apply the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the internet era to planning. And going through kind of each of the different kind of areas in planning and how kind of thinking about the things that we can learn. We've all seen graphs like this for the last couple of months, and we've been kind of studying them intensively. In essence, what graphs like this show is the reliance of kind of policy making on models and data, and the idea of actually kind of modeling different scenarios to see what the outputs could actually be. And modeling these scenarios using kind of as much data as we actually have available. Now, if we look at the way that we write planning policies, the equivalent of that are the pages and pages of or reports, hundreds of reports of evidence-based documents, which we outsource to consultants, and lots of them have got very, very good information, but we very, very rarely read them or use them. And then the policy themselves, because of the poor relationship between the policy and the evidence base, we end up writing policies in a very, very ambiguous way, which I thought was quite funny. Just this weekend, Rob McNichol, one of the planners from GLA, tweeted this in relation to the current policy on staying alert, and his take is actually, look, this sounds a little bit like the policies in the local plan. They're vague. And what we need to do is we need to start thinking about kind of what is it we want to say with policies? What is it we want them to achieve? And actually say what we want them to say. Write them in a way that is clear and understandable. And not only that, also try and find new ways to be able to keep them up to date, because we know that updating a local plan every 5 years isn't enough. It wasn't enough before this pandemic, and it isn't enough after the pandemic. The world around us changes very, very, very fast. Not only that, a typical local plan costs around £2.5 million to produce, and about £1 million of that it goes towards the evidence base. In other words, all these documents which no one actually reads. Now you can imagine a world where all these documents are data, and they can inform models that can produce scenarios. That will be a lot more robust. And we also need to monitor our local plans. Now we do this to a certain extent, but there is still a lot that we can learn. I think most local authorities and most planners will agree that the way that we monitor something as simple as housing numbers leaves a lot to be desired. Waltham Forest have done some excellent work looking at, together with Connected Places Catapult, looking at how we can actually kind of improve the system. And kind of they've mapped out 26 different touch points that a developer has with the local council during the process of building. Yet despite that, we still end up paying £70,000 or so as finder fees to external data providers to help us work out the number of homes that are actually built. Now, there's a lot that we can learn again from COVID. If we have a look at the way that we've been counting deaths, which has got its own complications, but we've been nearly successfully being able to kind of understand the impact of COVID on the number of people dying per day on a daily basis. There's a lot that we can actually learn from that and start to think about how we can start counting homes in a robust and kind of timely manner. Then there's the way that we make planning decisions, right? So the UK deals with plus or minus 450,000 planning applications every single year. That's a huge number. Nearly half of all these applications, when first submitted, are actually invalid. Either there's information missing, or there's some very kind of clear things that they're missing out. Yet we still process all this information, and this is partly because, on one hand, applicants, right, have to navigate this world of website guidance, legislation, all different sorts of maps, search tools, be able to figure out what you need to provide, what the application should actually contain is a bit of an art. Hence why we rely heavily on planning consultants to help us navigate this world. And then on the other side, the planners receive all these 450,000 planning applications, and they have to process them. They have to work out whether applications are all valid, and that takes a huge amount of time. Whether the applications, they've got to assess all the applications. They've got to kind of respond to inquiries, and all this is about kind of processing information, which today we do it in a very, very clumsy analog way, which leaves a lot to be desired. Which is kind of symptomatic of why kind of planning committee members quite often take very, very political decisions on applications. This is a planning committee before the days that they went on to Zoom, but in essence, kind of these local councillors are having to make incredibly complex decisions on documentation, which to be fair, they very rarely read from cover to cover. I mean, this is one planning application. This is the evidence base for one planning application. To what extent do you think these committee members have been reading this, right? To what extent have they actually fully understand the predicted impact that specific development will actually have? And I took this because this came up on Twitter the other day. I mean, people not only committee members, but the public are also really struggling to be able to understand what is being planned and what the details behind individual planning applications. It's also worth remembering that half of all planning applications in the UK are actually householder applications, right? So this is the really simple stuff. So we're talking about roof extensions, rear extensions, etc. And 90% of them are approved. Yet we still spend probably on average about £500 per household application to process them, right? Is there a world where we can actually start thinking about taking some of these simpler planning applications and actually start seeing how we can write policy in a way which we might be able to at least partly automate some aspects of it? And like with plan making, we spend a huge amount of money on development management. I think we think on average about £1.4 million per year. Interestingly, a lot of this is actually on post planning. So I haven't even touched on planning conditions, but the amount of time and effort spent on planning conditions leaves a lot to be desired. And that's the kind of stuff which we can really help with when it comes down to digitization. And then last and not least, and I guess particularly important in the short term, in the next kind of 6 months to a year, where social distancing is kind of prominent. There was a day which kind of the planning notices were the only way that you'd actually find out what's happening at the end of your street, and they were never kind of very good at doing that. The language is difficult to understand, but what happens now where social distancing comes in, and there's lots of issues around that. We've seen really interesting things. This was a Zoom party run by people from Brixton Market that was Zoom bombed, and people were protesting against a lot of the work that they're doing there. So it's interesting. There's kind of new ways that people are going to start engaging with the planning process, and we have to kind of stay one step ahead of it. And fundamentally, all this is about data, right? So Brittany Kaiser from it says that data is the most valuable asset on earth. But in planning, we still heavily rely on analog and manual ways of actually kind of collecting data, if we collect data at all. I often use this slide to kind of exemplify this. This is a redacted viability assessment. It's actually for Bishopsgate Goods Yard, where all the data has been redacted, in other words, blacked out, because it's commercially sensitive. And in a lot of cases, data is very sensitive, and we're seeing today kind of lots of issues around kind of health and health data to do with contact tracing. And we have to be very careful, but we do also have to start using data in a way which we don't yet. We can't at the minute we rely on large tech corporations to provide us with data. So some of you might have seen this. This comes from Google's assessment of their own data. So Google today probably understands better than the planning departments how our towns and neighborhoods are actually working, and we rely on them to give us data on the success of lockdown, etc. Which is a shame, because given the fact that we spend whatever £2.5 million on our local plans, or £1 million per local plan times 363 local authorities across the UK, the amount of data that we're actually kind of creating as part of our local plans could be incredibly useful, and could be much better used if they were collected in a way which were actually machine readable. And the same with all the 450,000 planning applications. This is some work that Open Systems Lab have been doing around householder planning applications. So they've identified each data point in a householder application, and they reckon there's around 350 different data points, your typical householder application. Now imagine your minor applications or your major applications. So much data goes through the planning system, but very little of it, if any, is actually captured. So this is where we start thinking of kind of what is the vision for a future planning system. Can we create a planning system which is made up of a web of interoperable software components that help planners collect, process, understand, and communicate built environment data and policies? So in essence, this is really what a 21st century planning system is about. It's about building a planning system which actually values data, which uses data to inform decisions, which collects data where it can, and which uses it to communicate with both developers and local communities. And this is a drawing that we've been kind of that has been banded around for a while, which actually shows what these components could actually look like. And number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the drawing basically explain how data can come from every planning application, go through the system, how it's collected, how post-occupancy data can now also be collected and validate a lot of the assumptions made during the planning process, and all of it can feed into some form of built environment data registry, which local authorities own. Which then, when they go out to produce their local plans, this data is used to inform the evidence base. So local authorities themselves become the custodians of a lot of this built environment data. And what's the outcome of all this? What's the outcome of a more digital planning system? Well, firstly, there's efficiency, right? So these outcomes aren't just about digital planning during a pandemic. These outcomes are were valid before the pandemic, and they will be valid in 5 years' time. A digital planning system can help us be more efficient and spend less time on tasks that can be automated and more complex and creative decision making. So think about discharging conditions or house or planning applications, right? Can we automate some aspects of that? It can make it more transparent so that both local communities and developers can understand what is planned and why decisions are actually made. So if we actually start collecting this data, we can visualize this data in ways that the local communities can understand. We can start helping developers understand why the policies are there and how to work with them. And then thirdly, more responsive. So we can better understand everything that's actually happening on the ground in more real time. So this is about how we monitor plans and use that monitoring data to then inform policies so we can keep our policies up to date. We don't have to necessarily wait 5 years to rewrite our plans, because if we do, by the time that these plans are actually published, they're usually out of date. And a lot of people are kind of bought into this idea. So this is at the Catapult and the Royal Tower Planning Institute have done a joint manifesto for how to build a digital planning system, which is worth having a look at. And if anything, if this I'm not quite sure exactly how I'm with time, but I've got a few more slides. But this stuff might sound a bit far-fetched, but it's not, and it is happening already. And I think one of the best examples to date is this, which is some work that MHCLG have been funding through the local digital fund, and it's been run by a not-for-profit called Open Systems Lab. And it's incredibly simple. In essence, it's a questionnaire which helps people really understand whether they need planning permission or not, right? So this is very similar to the animated house and the planning portal, but it's down to each individual site based on your development, right? So things like whether the development is in a conservation area or not, what is the size of the extension you might want to put, what is the location, etc. And what it does, it asks a number of questions, checks those questions against policy, and gives the applicant an indication of whether they need planning permission, whether they're likely to get planning permission, or whether they're likely to get planning permission refused straight away. So helping kind of both saving money both for local authorities and for the private sector. And what's fascinating in the work that these guys are doing is this, which is they're finding ways to turn planning policy into something that computers understand. So on the left to your screen is what the traditional planning policy is written, and to the right is how they're trying to work with the planners to actually to understand how the decision-making process happens. How can you turn policy into machine readable code? And what they've done, which is particularly nice as well, is they've thought, well, how can we actually put this power in the hands of planners, right? So it's not down to a tech company that controls our local plan. And they've created an interface which allows local authority planners to actually start building this questionnaire, start building this code themselves. So planners don't actually need to code. They can actually just start writing the policy in a way which computers can understand from day one. So I think that's kind of where I'd wrap up. And I think there's so much that we can learn. And there's an urgency which this current pandemic has brought, which really highlights the importance and the need to try and digitize the planning system.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Euan. Thank you, Euan. You couldn't have wonderfully positioned all the work that we've been doing for the last few years to get in a better way. So hands up to you. I forgot to say before we started, if you have any questions that you want to put to Euan, if you use the question box on the left-hand side, I'll pick them up. I've got a few already, but please do feel free to add some more. We've got about 11 minutes where we can grill you, and we don't really want to spend the time talking about his dog. The first question that kind of fits in quite nicely is what do you think the one singular change that could be done to the planning system would have the biggest effect to move the digital planning system forwards?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, I think firstly, the planning system is really big and complex, right? So no single silver bullet is going to fix things. We have to kind of take a very digital approach to this, kind of break problems down into very small problems, and then try and kind of understand them. And there's different ways that you can break these things down, right? So you can break things down and think, okay, so how can we should we redesign the planning portal to accept data rather than just documents, right? Could the planning portal become something which actually, instead of it being a fancy email which transfers PDFs, can it actually start to collect planning applications as data, right? So that's one area to do. Of course, to do that, you'd have to try and understand how can we create a data standard for planning applications. Again, so these things are all quite big. But to do that, right, so maybe we can break that into something even smaller. Can we start thinking, maybe we can deal with household planning applications first. Maybe we can start focusing just on the household applications, which we know are about half of all planning applications that are processed in the UK. Can we start thinking about how we digitize that as the first step towards a fully digital planning system?
The other question that kind of comes up in this space and fits quite neatly with that one is how will we be training planners differently? What new skills will we need to teach them in planning schools?
Okay, yeah, good question. And kind of, I often get asked that. Now, I don't think planners will ever need to code, right? Quite often we think, oh, planners should, I mean, it's good to learn how to code. And if you have the opportunity to learn how to code, I'm trying to learn. But that's, I mean, what training have planners had to try and to learn how to use Uber or Facebook, right? Not much, because these are bits of software which are designed incredibly well in a way which makes it very easy to, you don't even have to read instructions on how to use this stuff. And that's how proper 21st century software should be built. Should be built with a human-centered kind of approach that becomes incredibly easy to use. But what we do need to be aware is to be kind of, I think there's a certain level of digital literacy that planners need to be aware of, at least understand kind of what are the fundamentals of how digital stuff works, right? How do algorithms actually work? How do they make decisions? Now, this stuff isn't actually rocket science. It's about kind of learning some key principles around how technology actually works, just so we can understand and we can challenge it. Because technology can always be challenged, and it probably should always be challenged, particularly if we start using the technology for decision making. We have to check that these decisions actually make sense, and we have to be able to understand it. It's not too complicated. This stuff isn't rocket science. I think planners should always feel empowered to say, I don't understand this bit of the technology. Can you explain it to me? And if you still don't understand, then you probably shouldn't buy it and you probably shouldn't use it, because it means there's something dodgy there.
Yeah, that's really, really useful. The next kind of group of questions that have come in are much more around the what are we going to take from this lockdown period? What are we going to learn as a planning system in this space?
Yeah, I think it's on two levels, right? So on the most immediate level, I think, I don't know about other people, but I'm loving this virtual planning committee, right? As a bit of a planning geek, I can just attend all sorts of planning committees late at night and watch them, which is absolutely great. And it's also great because it really helps you understand the decision making, the rationale behind a lot of the decision making on big complex applications. So I think in the short term, I think that's one thing that hopefully will carry on. I don't think we should ever move away from everyone having real-time access to the way the planning decisions are actually made. But then I think on a higher level, I think, coming back to my first point, the fact that we've had globally, we've had kind of cities of millions of people being in lockdown for extended periods of time, we've realized how important planning actually is, how important it is to provide access to open space to people, housing quality, the quality of the public realm, like, I think if anything, a lot of people are saying, well, is this going to be the death of cities? I think quite the opposite. This is where we're going to really learn how to design cities incredibly well.
I think that's extremely fair, and I hope we don't lose that in the midst of all of this, because I think that's a risk. Sorry, just off the hook, because there's another question here. Where do you see the most resistance to change of a digital planning system, and how is that best overcome? And I'm going to encourage you not to name and shame anyone, because that's not fair.
Of course not. Of course not. Of course I wouldn't. No, I think I mean, this is the interesting thing with digital planning. For the last 4 years that we've been working this, we're pushing an open door. Property developers want it, local communities want it, politicians want it, planning authorities want it, central government want it, right? So in theory, this should be an easy thing for us to actually achieve. In practice, it's a lot more difficult, and I think the challenges are there isn't any kind of single barrier. I think it's this general kind of culture change, which has to come together with a bit of money and with a bit of effort, that I think we can slowly start moving. There isn't I think, as I said, we're very much pushing out an open door. There isn't a single person that's in the way. We can make this happen, but it will just take time, and it's okay that it takes time. I think it's okay that it's a slow transition. It shouldn't be from one day to another anyway.
No, I think that's really fair. The other kind of phrase that you really picked up on, and I've not seen it worded like this before, is upgrading engagement. And I thought that was really fascinating. Do you think that's going to be maybe one of the things we take out of this, is this concept of upgrading engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge that we have now in the short term is that it's getting harder for us to do our physical engagement, right? So from planning notices to consultation events. And I think hopefully we'll soon be able to get back to a world where we can do these, because I think these are important. But there is the opportunity now to actually start to make the most of the situation and really kind of invest our time and money in actually developing the tools to actually do online engagement. So there is some really good stuff already. The guys from Built ID built an application called I think it's called Get My View, something like that, which is a really flexible way to engage people around development. Tools like Commonplace and others are also really powerful out there. We still have to get better at doing statutory consultations, right? So kind of planning notices and the way that we collect comments for that, and the way that we assess the comments and respond to those comments. There's still a lot of work to be there. But I think over the next few months, the fact that we're going to have to be stuck in a version of this lockdown, I think we have to really kind of start building some tools to do that better. And hopefully once we're after lockdown, we'll continue to use these tools, because quite often digital engagement can engage a much higher number of people than being there in person.
I think that's a really good point. So I'm just trying to pick up the messages as they're coming through. Do you think that any of the changes you've talked about today, e.g. capturing and making use of wider data, would have allowed us to be better prepared and more resilient for the crisis we're going through at the moment? Yes, absolutely. If you look at again, I'm assuming that the people in the audience have been watching these virtual planning committees. We're watching kind of projections of PDFs on screen, right? Just the way that we present planning application information to in our committee meetings, I think is embarrassing, right? There are so many better ways to present information than in these slides and these PDFs that we see being presented. Incredibly complex drawings, and then a bunch of reports in the background that you can read if you have the time, which no one actually does, right? We need to get better at presenting data, right? Yes, collecting data, that's really important, but once we collect it, there's all sorts of new visualization tools that we can be thinking about and using to actually present that information, not only to local politicians, but also to the wider communities. I'd like to believe our elected members read the reports. I'd like to believe lots of things as well. And finally, the same question I've asked all of our speakers, which is probably the most kind of deep one, and I hope one of the things we've demonstrated through these talks is how wide a an industry, the planning industry is. But you and I have been through a couple of recessions now, and we've seen the influx of planners go up and down and different challenges in planning schools. What advice would you give somebody coming into the planning industry now about what the challenges they're going to face going forwards?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's in a way it's similar to the skills, but I think hopefully a sense of urgency, right? So I think quite often planners are embarrassed of being planners, and I think that's a shame, because I mean we're living today in a world where most of the human population live in cities, and planning has never been so important, right? So cities are responsible for the majority of our carbon emissions, the majority of our waste, but also the biggest opportunity for the future of mankind, and planners are at the center of this. So I think as planners come into the profession, I think being honest with themselves of why they do what they do, and actually realizing there's a sense of urgency in their job and there's a need for their job, I think is probably the most motivating and inspiring thing you can actually have. And I think once you have that very clear mission, and you're kind of, you know exactly what that mission is, then I think a lot of people achieve great things.
Great. I'd have to agree with you. So I think we've come to the end of the time we've got together. So first of all, I need to thank you, Euan, for preparing your presentation and committing to do this. It's really appreciated. Secondly, if you get a chance, do follow Euan on Twitter. His Twitter handle's below. He's always tweeting some interesting stuff, and I have to admit, even I come across things that I've never would never even thought of. And he doesn't just tweet pictures of his dog, just so we're clear.
Sometimes.
Finally, we've got to say thank you to Natalie and Lucy, who have made all of this magic happen. All of these are being recorded, so they are appearing on our YouTube channel, which I believe is called #plantalk. But if you follow my LinkedIn feed, you'll see a link to them and to where we've put all the videos. So yeah, thank you ever so much, and there we go, done.
Thanks everyone for watching.